For 2 decades, Sister Wives sold a remarkably tidy narrative. Meri Brown was difficult, emotionally volatile, and perpetually to blame for the family's dysfunction. This framing was repeated so often, it hardened into supposed fact. What the series, and its most loyal defenders, conveniently avoided was context. When that context is examined, the caricature collapses, leaving behind a far more uncomfortable truth. Meri was not the problem. She was the pressure point. Meri entered marriage at 19, barely an adult, deeply indoctrinated, and intensely devoted to a husband who would soon begin dismantling the emotional ground beneath her feet. Her first lesson in plural marriage was not sisterhood, patience, or spiritual growth. It was betrayal, dressed up as religious destiny. The second wife was not a distant stranger, selected through transparent, agreed-upon protocol. She was Meri's former sister-in-law, her brother's ex-wife, who pursued Meri's husband directly, bypassing the first wife entirely. The courtship unfolded behind Meri's back, with information dispensed in careful fragments after decisions had already been made. Even by the standards of their insular religious community, this was irregular. Yet, Meri was expected to absorb it with saintly composure, lest she be accused of emotional weakness. As if that were insufficient upheaval, the family tree became a Mobius strip. The new wife's mother married Meri's father-in-law. Suddenly, Meri was navigating a household in which ex-siblings-in-law, parents, and spouses overlapped in ways that would test even the most emotionally agile adult, let alone a teenager still learning what marriage was supposed to feel like. When the idea of scheduling a wedding on Meri's birthday was floated and dismissed as not a big deal, the message was unmistakable. Meri's discomfort was an inconvenience, not a concern. Then came infertility. In a belief system that treats a woman's worth as inseparable from her reproductive output, infertility is not merely painful, it is punitive. Meri struggled to conceive, while the second and third wives became pregnant with ease, producing the large family she was promised yet excluded from. Her grief unfolded in public, framed not as loss, but as deficiency. She was routinely reminded that she had only one child, as though biology were a moral failing. Within the household, alliances solidified quickly. The husband, chronically conflict avoidant, abdicated leadership entirely. Rather than mediating disputes or setting boundaries, he famously went to work and let them fight it out, later expressing bewilderment that the result was chaos. This abdication was not neutral. In a plural marriage, absence is power. By refusing to intervene, he allowed resentment to metastasize, then blamed the women, particularly the one least inclined to disappear quietly. Meri's crime, ultimately, was visibility. She was direct, organized, and unwilling to perform passive cheerfulness while absorbing humiliation. In a family that prized emotional suppression as virtue, this made her dangerous. It was easier to label her mean than to confront the system that required her silence. Over time, the narrative calcified. Meri was controlling. Meri was selfish. Meri was difficult to live with. Meanwhile, the structural inequities went unscrutinized. Financial decisions were framed as generosity toward larger households rather than as collective agreements. Meri's contributions were welcomed. Her needs were negotiable. She was repeatedly told she deserved less space, less consideration, less voice, because she had fewer children, as though deprivation were an appropriate penalty for infertility. The emotional consequences were predictable. Isolated within her own family, abandoned by a husband who openly admitted to withholding affection, Meri sought connection elsewhere and fell into an online deception. The response was not empathy, but outrage. Her loneliness was treated as betrayal rather than inevitability. The family recoiled in performative shock, asking how this could have happened while ignoring the years of neglect that made it almost guaranteed. Even her child absorbed the family's contempt. Growing up in a household where their mother was openly disrespected by a father, by sister wives, by the collective narrative, inevitably shaped behavior. Children learn whom to value by watching whom adults dismiss. Meri was rarely defended, and the consequences were visible. Critics often insist that acknowledging Meri's suffering requires absolving her of all wrongdoing. This is a false binary. Meri was not flawless. She could be sharp, controlling, and emotionally reactive. She sometimes weaponized her authority as first wife. She did not always handle conflict with grace. None of this negates the reality that she was operating within a framework designed to provoke exactly those traits. Polygamy does not reward vulnerability or fairness. It rewards endurance and compliance. Meri offered resistance instead. What remains striking is how consistently accountability bypassed the man at the center of this system. The husband positioned himself as a benevolent participant, burdened by emotional women and ungrateful circumstances. In reality, he curated competition, withheld clarity, and fostered dependency while congratulating himself for spiritual leadership. The wives, conditioned to blame one another, largely complied. Polygamy depends on this misdirection to function. The irony is that Meri, long painted as irrational, now appears the most clear-eyed. She was the first to visibly crack under the weight of the arrangement, and the first to step away from it emotionally. While others continued to perform loyalty in exchange for diminishing returns, Meri absorbed public scorn, financial inequity, and emotional abandonment, then paid her debts anyway. Her money was always acceptable. Her presence was not. As the family disintegrated, the long-standing myths became harder to sustain. The wives who once minimized Meri's pain began articulating their own versions of it. The husband, stripped of buffers, revealed himself as incapable of accountability or growth. Meri, once dismissed as the villain, emerged as something far more threatening to the old narrative, a survivor who stopped apologizing for reacting normally to an abnormal life. The persistent urge to reduce her story to personality flaws misses the point entirely. This was not a failure of temperament. It was a failure of ideology. Polygamy demands that women suppress jealousy, grief, and self-preservation in service of male authority. Meri failed at that suppression. For that, she was punished. In retrospect, the question is not why Meri struggled. The question is why anyone expected her not to. Subscribe.